Okay guys, so we talked about the mixer. Like I said, if you have any questions about the mixer, about something that we didn't go over or something that didn't go over in enough detail, like I said, talk to the trainers. They'll be more than willing to help you out with answering any questions you may have about the mixer and mixing. But let's go ahead and now let's talk about the CDJs, because that is probably what's been on your mind this whole time as you're watching this video. It's like, oh, what are these really cool shiny devices on the sides here of the mixer? And so I'm going to go ahead and talk about that. So intro to the CDJ. So CDJ is actually these days kind of a blanket term for any sort of player in the DJ world that plays digital media like CDs or files on like a flash drive. In the last video we talked about turntables, and you know that from watching that video that turntables are these analog devices that take a vinyl record and you put it down on the platter here, the record spins, you put a needle down on the record, and the needle picks up the sound and then transmits it over to the mixer, and boom, you have music, right? And then we can do things to the record as it's playing to manipulate how fast it's playing, or or even other things, more sophisticated things like scratching and beat juggling and whatnot. So that we talked about is sort of like the basics of where DJing started from. However, over the years, especially over the past decade or so, things have really progressed as technology has progressed. And I'm not going to go over the whole history of CDJs and how they came about, but essentially the CDJ is a device that is produced by, or I believe originally produced by Pioneer, that basically takes either CDs or other digital inputs these days and outputs them to a mixer and lets you play and manipulate them, much like a turntable, but with the new digital format. So CDJ, like I mentioned, is sort of a blanket term now, where any similar device made by any other company. So these days it's not just Pioneer, but it's all the other companies like Denon, Gemini, Newmark. They all make similar devices that do similar things to the Pioneer CDJs. But CDJs are generally thought of as the ones produced by Pioneer, and whenever you go to a club setting, or if you go to a festival or any sort of semi-professional DJ, you'll probably see them, if they're using CDJs, they'll be using Pioneer CDJs. And there's different models of CDJs. There's lower cost models that are a little smaller. There's mid cost ones that are bigger, like this one, but have maybe a little bit less functionality. And then there's the top of the line models like this one here, the CDJ-2000, which do more and offer more features and functionality compared to the other ones. So you may see different types of CDJs out there in the wild, but especially in clubs and festivals, as of this video, you'll usually see the CDJ-2000 Nexus out there being played by the pros. And so we're very lucky here to have the CDJs, the CDJ-2000 Nexuses here in the club for you to play with, so that when you play on this, you would be fully prepared to play at a club or at a festival if you ever get that far in your DJing career. So it's really great that we have these here. So like I said, CDJs, they are basically, in a nutshell, they're a digital version of a turntable. That's really all they do. Basically, you can plug in music into this thing and output it to your mixer, play it out to the crowd, and you can do things to the music, manipulate how it's playing to kind of get both the beat matching parts down, but also get some other cool things like looping, like cue points, and whatnot. All in the digital format, whether through CDs or flash drives or computer. Okay, so let me go ahead and start talking about that just by starting to do things on the CDJ here. So very often in the club, you'll see people use flash drives on the CDJ. So like I mentioned, the CDJ can actually take both CDs and a flash drive, or a computer input here on the top left corner. But you know, back when CDJs first started out, DJs first started using them with CDs because they only had a CD slot, a CD input. They didn't have the USB feature until many years afterwards. So you know, that used to be the way to use CDJs, but these days you'll notice that most DJs have kind of moved away from using CDs and are now using almost exclusively either the USB flash drive or a computer input into the CDJ. So I'm going to go ahead and take a flash drive and use that for this particular video. So let me just go over here and grab it. And so here's a USB flash drive. Doesn't really matter too much. Well, let me take that back. It does matter what kind of flash drive you use to some extent. In terms of read performance, probably not too big of a deal which kind of flash drive you have, but you do kind of want to get a better flash drive when you're using the CDJs, something that has really good read and write transfer speeds, because that'll just make your life a lot easier and a lot less painful when you're trying to get music on and off of the flash drive. I'm not going to go over in much detail about which flash drives are good or bad for DJing with. You know, as of this video, at this time, there's different models on the market that are probably good, but you know, if you're watching this a year from now, then it's possible that there's going to be other flash drives that are better. So I'm not going to go over in too much detail. You can ask somebody in the club for recommendations on what kind of flash drive to use, but just be aware that it is probably a good idea if you're going to be DJing to invest in a good pair or a good flash drive or two, so you can have an easy time getting music onto it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take the cap off of this one and just plug it in. So let me just talk about how to actually turn this on, because right now these guys are turned on, but there's actually a power button on the back here. So this is, you know, if you come into the club, there might be a time when everything's off, and after you flip on all of the equipment through the power strip here, you know, this guy may or may not be on. So if it does happen to be off, the power button is just back here, pretty easy, and you can see because there's a little label here. So you're just gonna flip that on, and it'll take like a couple seconds here to boot up, and now it's ready to go. So you'll notice the screen says it's not loaded. There's nothing loaded, no CDs, no USB flash drive. So I'm going to go ahead and take my flash drive and just plug it into the top left here, like that. And then when the red light is on, not blinking, go ahead and press USB here on the left side. And what this does is it will bring up the USB menu, and this will tell you that, you know, when the USB light is lit up like this, this tells you that this CDJ is now going to be reading from the USB flash drive. Okay, so the way it works here in terms of browsing music on your flash drive, there's two ways you can kind of do this. Either A, you create just a bunch of folders on your flash drive and categorize music by throwing stuff into these different folders and accessing a folder hierarchy by turning this knob down to folder and selecting. Or, and probably the recommended way of organizing your music on your flash drive for the CDJ, is to download a free program from Pioneer called Rekordbox. And Rekordbox is a really cool program. You can download it for free and put it on your computer. And it's basically kind of a media library that will let you import your music, sort, you know, tag, do whatever it is you need to do with the music to get it prepared. And then you can plug in a flash drive and transfer your music through Rekordbox onto the flash drive, and it'll then automatically organize the music on your flash drive so that it's usable with the CDJ. And what's also nice about it is that you can create playlists. So for example, I make a lot of use of this. I create playlists for myself of music I want to play in Rekordbox, and then I just basically, using Rekordbox, drag and drop those playlists from my computer onto my flash drive so I can play them on the CDJ. Okay, so you know, a nice thing with Rekordbox, for example, is it might break out your music by artist, album, track, and then there's a history. So if you've played tracks in the past on the CDJ, it'll keep track of that, and you can go back to those guys, or you can search for music on your flash drive. But I'm going to go ahead and just go to playlist here and just pick out a track. Let's see. I'm going to try this guy. Good old Tiesto. Always a good little default to go to, right? I'll let you be the judge. But anyway, so I just loaded a track here, so you probably saw me do some knobs and button pushes here. What I did is I went ahead and, let me just back up here, I went to playlist off of the main menu here. I pressed down on the knob to go into the playlist section. You'll see the screen change, and now it's showing me all the playlists I have on my flash drive here. So I just went into the first folder here that I have, and then you'll see whatever songs you have in that folder to select. So you'll just turn the knob to highlight the song you want to play, and then you just press to load the song up. So now we know the song is loaded on the CDJ because we now have this waveform here, right here and right here down at the bottom. We have a time, we have a BPM, we have the title of it, and now we know we're good to go. So, like I said, the CDJ is basically just a digital version of a turntable. So that being said, though, there are some different conventions in using a CDJ versus a turntable. First of all, you're not going to be queuing up a track the way you did on the turntable by turning or manipulating a record on a platter. Instead, you have this jog wheel here. So it kind of looks like a platter on a turntable, but it behaves a little bit differently because there's no spinning record on it, okay? This does spin freely, but it's used slightly differently that I'm going to explain in just a second here. And let me just adjust that for myself. But if you want to play a track, it's a little bit different because, like I said, there's nothing spinning here, so you can't just like cue up a track with your hand and then just release it and let it play. You actually have to press something or toggle something. So on the CDJs, you have these two buttons down on the bottom left corner. There's a cue button, and then there's a play pause button. The cue button is basically a starting point for your track. So right now, I have auto cue turned on the CDJ, and what that does for me is it sets a cue point in the track automatically at the beginning of the track for me, okay? And so what is the cue point? The cue point is basically if you remember from the previous video when we're talking about beat matching on the turntable, you remember that I tried to find the first beat of the track, and I would do so by physically finding it on the record and holding that location where that first beat is by holding the record in place and preventing it from spinning. So that location that I was holding it at, where that first beat was essentially my cue point. It was the point from which I was going to cue up the track. Okay, so that's what the cue point, the cue button here does. Is it's basically a locator for that point in the track that I want to start playing from. Okay, so let me turn up this track here. Okay, so this track is now up on the mixer, so I can hear it. And so basically, if I press the cue button, you probably hear that. You heard that like beat right there, and that was actually a kick drum. And the reason is because this track starts off with a kick drum right off the bat. The first beat, the first sound in it is the kick drum. So what that means is that the cue point is already at the first beat for me. So I can go ahead and just press this button and play that first beat at will. Okay? Now you'll notice that as I press it, it stops playing once I release it. So if I press and hold it, you'll notice that now the track is playing. But if I release it, it stops, and if I try pressing it again, it starts back from the beginning. So basically, anytime I press the cue point, or the cue button I should say, basically the track will go back and start playing from the beginning, from wherever that cue point is. Okay? So keep that in mind, because I'm now going to talk about that a little bit in just a second here again. But let me talk about the other button here, and that's the play pause button here. As you can notice that it's flashing, and the reason why it's flashing is because it's basically telling me, okay, this track is ready to play. So if I press this button, well, guess what? It plays. It's not rocket science here, right? So what happens if I press it again? Pauses. I know, shocker, right? Play, pause. It plays and then pauses the track. You'll notice though now that this button is blinking and the Q button is now blinking. Basically what happens is whenever I play a track like this using the play and pause button, and if I pause it, what's going to happen is the Q button is going to light up because it's now telling me it's ready to set a cue point at the location that I just paused this track at. So for example, let's say I don't want to actually have the beat at this first beat here. Let's say I want it somewhere further in. So I'm going to play this track for a couple seconds. Okay. Let's see if I can fast forward a tiny bit. Okay, so I'm going to pause it right there. Okay. So if I press this button now, this Q button here, what's going to happen is it's now going to reset the cue point to this new location. You'll actually notice that on the platter here in the middle where these lights are, you'll notice that the location, this little red line here, has actually switched locations. Initially it was somewhere up here, now it's down here. This is also kind of indicating to me where exactly the cue point is in relation to the platter, and then it's also telling me that it's changed from where it was before. So now what happens is if I play by pressing the Q button, you'll now notice that it's playing from a different location. It's from that location that I paused it at. So that's what you can do with when using both the Q button and the play pause button, is you can actually switch where that cue point may be in the track. And this actually comes in really helpful for tracks where the first sound isn't a kick drum that's easy to play with, or if there's like vocals that starts off with and you don't want to start with the vocals, or whatever other scenario there may be. If you don't want to play from just the very beginning of the track, then you can set the cue point manually by using these two buttons. Now let me go ahead and backtrack just a little bit more here. And I'm going to go ahead and reload this track just for easiness here. Now what happens, like, for example, if I want to set a cue point, but it's not, I don't pause it at exactly the right spot that I want to be at. Okay? So let's try this. So I'm going to play this. And I'm waiting for something, and I'm going to pause it, and I pause it there. So now, if I press Q, it's going to reset the cue point to that location. And then now, it starts with a kick drum, but it doesn't start, it starts with that clap there, you know, and maybe that's not exactly where I want it to be. I can actually finally adjust where this cue point is by using the jog wheel in conjunction with these buttons. So right now, let me go ahead and press play and pause it. So now it's back into the cue, I'll call it the cue setting mode, where I can set the cue point. So I'm going to actually turn the jog wheel now to sort of adjust where this cue point is going to be exactly. Okay. Now let me point something out here before we do this. There's this button here on the side called jog mode, and what this does is it controls what kind of jogging mode the jog wheel is going to function in. In order to be able to do what I'm just about to do here, you have to make sure that it's in vinyl mode. So it's the blue light lit up here that says vinyl. Make sure that this is on, otherwise you won't be able to do what I'm about to do here. Okay, so now watch this. I'm going to turn the jog wheel here. You hear that? So now you can actually hear what I'm doing is I'm moving back and forth in the track just by moving the jog wheel as it's paused. So I'm basically kind of scrubbing through the track here. This is nice because I can now finally adjust the track, the location of the cue point, by turning the jog wheel. So you'll also notice that there's this little line here, little gap that's going over this little red line here. As I go over this little red line, I'm going over that cue point that I set earlier. It's kind of like when I was using my hand to manipulate the record in the previous video, and I was trying to find that first beat, and I would go over the first beat with my hand. It was kind of like the same thing going on over here with the jog wheel instead. Okay? So let's say I want to manipulate it, so now the cue point is actually just before this beat right here. So I'm going to set it right there, and then now I'm just going to hit Q, and now my cue point is right exactly at that beat where I want it to be, okay? Now, another little trick here that I wanted to point out. Previously, I just played the track by hitting play, but if I want to go ahead and like tap out the beat, I can go ahead and tap out the beat and then let it play by simultaneously hitting play and pause, and that'll let the track continue playing. Okay, so that's something you could do. We want to discourage tapping too much on the Q button because it can wear out over time, but that is an option for you. The other option is, like I did earlier, you can go ahead and just hit play pause and it'll play from the Q point right there. Okay. Now you'll notice that anytime I hit Q, the track automatically goes right back to that cue point where I set it. Okay, so again, just a little bit different. It's kind of like I said earlier, that it's kind of like finding the first beat on the vinyl, but it's just now using the combination of these two buttons and the jog wheel together to be able to do basically the same thing. Okay, all right. So speaking of the jog wheel, let's go ahead and reset this track. So I'm going to go ahead and now load up another track here on the CDJ. So you'll notice that I have this one USB flash drive set on this one, but I want to actually have another track playing in the background. Let's say this is the track that's going to be playing out to the crowd. Okay? Now, there's two ways you can do this. Either A, you can bring yourself another USB flash drive and plug it in and just set it up the same way you have over here. Or, what's really neat about the CDJ-2000s is that you can actually connect them together using an Ethernet cable. And what that allows you to do is I can go over here and hit the link button, and the link button will allow me to read on this CDJ whatever is currently loaded on this other CDJ. So right now I have this flash drive over here, and if I hit link over here, I can actually read what's on this flash drive as well, but just on this other CDJ here. And you can actually do this with up to 4 or maybe even more, I'm not sure, but up to 4 decks usually. You can have all of them hooked together, and you can just have one flash drive basically driving all 4 decks at the same time. And it's really cool. It's a really nice feature of the 2000s because it saves you money on having to buy too many flash drives. Or also if you're in a pinch and you don't have another one. Okay, so this is really cool. So what I did is I went ahead and hit link here, and basically the same thing shows up on the screen here as I did on the other one that I loaded earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and go into playlist here, and I'm just going to select some other track. Let's see, what do I want to do? Alright. Well, I probably should have thought about this just before I started filming here, but I'm going to go ahead and... Okay, I know which one I want to do. Alright, here we go. Alright, so I just loaded up a track right there. Let's make sure that it's playing. Okay, good deal. Alright, so now I have 2 tracks playing. I'm going to let that guy play. So now let's talk about... Alright, so I have a CDJ here. We just talked about the cue button and the play button here, how that was kind of like queuing up the track the same way that we did on the turntable, but just with buttons and a jog wheel. You know, talked about finding the first beat of the track on the CDJ. So now let's go into the next step of how you would actually start beat matching with the CDJ and being able to accomplish the same thing that we did with the turntable. So, like I mentioned, we don't have a spinning platter here anymore, so I can't just go and nudge a track or manipulate the beats just by manipulating a record on a platter. Instead, I have to use basically this jog wheel to do the same thing, and also these buttons right here. So, what are you going to do? Remember, from the last video, what you need to do is you need to find the first beat and start playing your track from the first beat in relation to the other track, so you can start beat matching. Okay? So what I'm going to go ahead and do is do that. So let this guy play, and just cue this guy up. Okay? And can hear right there that the two tracks are already off from each other. So that means that one of our tracks is too slow. Well, this is the one we're going to work on, so this track might be either too slow or too fast in relation to the other track. Now, I'll admit, in terms of beat matching, the CDJ-2000s are going to make your life a lot easier because they give you some more information that the turntables don't. The one thing you'll notice is that there's a BPM counter on here. So you already know right off the bat, as that track is playing on the other deck, that, that you already know what BPM there is in relation to this one. So the BPM counter is really nice, as you can probably imagine, because it already gives you an idea of where you are with this track that you're going to mix in, where you are in relation to the other track. And these are even really nice because for the CDJ-2000 Nexuses, they actually show you the BPM down to the 10th. So like this one says it's 129.4 BPM, this one says it's 126.5 BPM. So right off the bat, we already know like this track is too fast, and we know to a pretty good degree of precision how much we need to adjust our track that we're going to mix in to be able to get it to be beat matched. And in terms of beat matching, same concept as in the turntable here. We have this fader on the right side called the pitch fader. Here it's called tempo because that's usually, in terms of like DJing, that's what we're dealing with is the tempo. So here it's labeled tempo, but it's the same thing as the pitch fader on the turntable. This will just control how fast or slow our track is going to play, depending on wherever we set it. And so you'll notice as you move the pitch fader here, the tempo fader, that the BPMs actually change on the track here to reflect whatever speed that we think that it thinks it'll be playing at. Excuse me. So there are a couple of things that might be going through your mind right now. First things first, it's probably you're thinking to yourself, oh man, I have a BPM counter now. I'm already at home plate. Like, what's there to do? Because if I already know that track over there is 126.5 and this one is at 127 right now, all I have to do, right, is just move it down to 126.5 and I'm good to go. Well, I will say that it does cut down on a lot of time here because you can conceivably do that. But let me point something out here. First of all, both of these tracks are tracks that came from me preparing this flash drive on Rekordbox. What that means is that I actually had Rekordbox software pre-analyze this track ahead of time so that it already calculated what the overall tempo of both tracks are. And so when I load those tracks onto the CDJs, the CDJs is able to give me a more accurate readout of the BPM than if I had done it otherwise. And the reason is because if I don't pre-analyze the track in Rekordbox, the track actually has to be, if I were to take some track, for example, and just throw it on the on the flash drive and just plug it into the CDJ without doing anything to it in Rekordbox, then what happens is the CDJ actually has to analyze the track as it's playing it. And so that has some inherent, in my experience, some inherent inaccuracies because you're leaving the calculations and everything, all the digital mumbo jumbo that's going on in the background in the device, you're leaving it up to the CDJ and not to Rekordbox where you can manipulate things. So I've seen it, for example, where I'll load a track up on my flash drive, no pre-analyzing in Rekordbox, and then when I play it on the CDJ, it's giving me a tempo that's like 2 or 3 BPMs off from where it actually is, or it'll half-time it. So, for example, a track that's normally 140 something BPM will show up as 70 something on the CDJ. Now, that in of itself isn't really a big deal if you know how to beat match, because you can just make the corrections, the right adjustments on the fly just using your ears and just doing some basic beat matching. But if you were to only rely on the BPM counter here on the CDJ, you're going to run into a problem when the BPM counter isn't showing you an accurate number. And so what I'm trying to say here is, even though the BPM counters, the record box, pre-analyzing, everything, even though all that stuff is pretty good these days, there do still happen situations where you'll load up a track and it will not give you the BPM or the tempo that it actually is at. And so then you're kind of flying blind because you're going to be trying to match numbers on the screen to something that doesn't exist in reality. So that is my kind of spiel in terms of saying to you, hey, it's nice that we have BPM counters here because it'll make life a little bit easier, but don't rely on it too much because you ultimately, if you want to be a good DJ, you still need to be able to do the beat matching by ear and be able to compensate for whenever the technology breaks down for you. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out. I know it's kind of a lot of detail about, well, the pros and cons of BPM counters and stuff and using the CDJs, but it's something I kind of want to stress in terms of, yes, we have all this cool stuff in the CDJ and we can, make things easier for us, but still try to learn how to beat match so you can be able to utilize everything to its maximum potential. Okay, so all right, so going back to the track, going back to beat matching, so I was talking about the BPM counters, so I already kind of know, for example, this track is here, this track is there in terms of tempo. I can adjust to kind of get around to the same area just using the pitch fader here looking at the screen. But I could do the same thing by ear. So let's say I don't have the BPM counter here, right? And I don't really know what's going on in terms of which one's faster and which one's slower. Let me demonstrate to you how we're actually going to go through and beat match here. So let me actually just, before I do that, let me load up another track that I know for a fact should have a different tempo than the other track that we have already set up. So let's give me a second here to find something. Okay. All right. Okay. So now we have this track playing. So I'm going to set this guy down to the 0 mark just to kind of start from the neutral position. So we've got that first beat on this track. I'm going to play it. You can hear that it's already going off. So what am I going to do? I'm actually going to try to do the same thing that I did on the turntable in terms of nudging the record either to make it go faster or slower, but I'm going to use the jog wheel instead. So what I'm going to do is, in order to speed up the track, I'm just going to turn to the right. And you'll notice, you'll hear that the track actually sped up. Now if I start it over again, and now I turn it the other way, I'll turn it left, you'll notice that it started slowing down. So this is how I'm going to nudge the track around and adjust it so that I get it going either faster or slower in relation to the other track. So same idea, like in the turntable as I was doing it with the label or the side of the platter to either speed up or slow down the track, I'm just doing the same things with the jog wheel here. Okay. And you know what? I'm going to change my mind a little bit on this track here. I'm going to go ahead and actually change it to something else that is a little bit more in tune in terms of vibes with the other track that I chose here. So let me just give me a second here if I can find something good. And let's see if this is a good track. Yeah, I like this one. All right, so here we go. So going back to this track, it's like the same process. I'm just gonna cue up my track and let me fast forward this. All right. Here comes the beat. I'm going to cue this guy up. Okay. So let's try slowing it down. Not good. So let me re-cue it. And I'm going to speed it up. All right, you hear that? I got it back in sync. Now it's off again. And back in sync. So same idea, like on the turntable, I'm just nudging it along. So now what am I going to do? I already know this track is too slow, so I'm going to get it back in sync, and I'm going to move the pitch fader. Move it towards the plus. Now you still got to speed it up some more. Moving the pitch fader. Now you'll notice that it's pretty close. Staying in sync with the other track longer. So just for the sake of time, I'm going to fast forward this guy. Pretty good. So we're now on beat. Both tracks are on beat. And that's all there really is to it. So same idea, just cue up your track, play it, check to hear with your ears whether or not they're on beat. And if they're not, adjust using the jog wheel. And whatever adjustments you have to make to get this track synced up with the other one, make that same adjustment on the pitch fader here. And listen again. And if it goes off again, make the same adjustment, try it again. And if that works, again, adjust it on the pitch fader. And then you just keep doing the same thing, over and over, just to making the small adjustments, and eventually you'll get there. So again, same concept as the turntables. The actual process of beat matching isn't really any different from the turntables. In theory, the only difference are the controls. Instead of using our hands on the record, we're just using these buttons here. We're using the jog wheel here. And that's all we're really doing. And then we're just using the pitch fader here, just like on the turntable, just to make our permanent adjustment to the track's tempo, so that we can get it beat matched with the other track. Okay? So again, like I said earlier about the mixer, that was just a brief overview of how you beat match on the CDJ. If you have any questions about the actual process of beat matching on the CDJ, feel free to ask your trainer, and they'll be able to answer your questions perhaps in more detail than I did if I missed something. Okay, so like I said, like as you probably noticed earlier, I was moving the pitch fader here. I was basically kind of pretending that I didn't see the BPMs on the screen here, but yeah, obviously I could have just easily looked at the BPM, made the adjustment on the pitch fader right off the bat to get the same number, and just beat match that way. But let me just say this again. Stress it. I can't stress this enough. Make sure you check that it is beat matched, because just because the numbers say that they should be, it doesn't mean that they will be. Make sure you check in your headphones that they sound like they're on beat. So that means you still have to cue up the track, play both together in your headphones, make sure that things are on beat. And if they're not, and sometimes this will happen, sometimes even if you get this set to the right number, there might be a slight variation between the two tracks that you won't be able to pick up just through the numbers. And you'll notice that you still have to adjust a little tiny bit up or down on the jog wheel to get things perfectly in line with each other, to get the beats perfectly in sync with each other. Okay, so always make sure you check in your headphones before you start mixing in, because you don't want something to get messed up live when everybody can hear it and you're trying to scramble and fix a beat matching error. Okay, so again, don't rely on the technology too much. Always rely on your ears, because they will tell you for sure whether or not things are good. Okay. All right, so let me just go ahead and start talking about a little bit about the rest of the functionality here on the CDJ. I'm not going to go into too much detail over everything, because those are things you guys can probably ask the trainers in the club to show you or talk about some more. But I just kind of want to go over a little bit over everything here. Well, maybe not everything, but mostly everything that it's important. So there's a lot of other buttons on the CDJ here. there's all these buttons here. These buttons right here, for example, control whatever your input signal is. So that means, like, for example, if I want to play off of USB, I'll just hit the USB. If I have an SD card, I can actually insert an SD card here. I could toggle to that. Link is just to link up with another CDJ. So if my flash drive, for example, was right there, I would hit link here so I could access the data on that flash drive on the other CDJ. Disk is for CDs, if you use that. And record box, I believe, I haven't really used this too much myself, but it's if you hook up the computer to the CDJ, and you can use that functionality right there. These buttons at the top here, these are just different menus that you can go through, or actually I should say views you can go through on the CDJ. So right now we're in the browse view, which means we can browse through whatever our music is on that particular folder directory. But if I want to go back to just a single track overview of the waveform, I can just hit the info button, or first turn off the browse button and then go to info. And I can show some of the information about the track, you know, the artist, the time, the BPM, cover art, whatnot. If I toggle that off, I'll just see the basic overview of the waveforms and stuff like that, and I can toggle back to the browsing view by just hitting browse like that. Okay. Tag list is cool. What you can actually do is, as you're playing music, you can browse through your music, and you can actually tag them to basically save for later. So for example, if I decide I want to play this track later on in the night, or if I want to play that track, instead of trying to have to remember everything, I can just tag them on the CDJ, so then I can go quickly to this list and quickly just access the track without having to browse through everything. So it's just an ease of use feature there. The back button is if you want to go back in the menu. So if I go to browse, if I want to go back a step, I'll just hit the back button. That's all it does. Pretty self-explanatory. This is actually for the tagging feature that I mentioned just earlier. So this will toggle the menu that will show you the tagged tracks, but this is what actually will tag them for you. Quantize and auto cue here. All this does is it turns on quantize. Quantize is nice because what it does is for example, if you have loops that you set and you have your tracks analyzed in record box, for example, then what this will do is it'll actually snap the loop directly to the beat, right on beat. So you have nice, perfect on-beat loops if you have quantize on, for example. And then time mode will just change whether or not this display shows your remaining time or time elapsed. And then if you hold this down, it'll actually turn off the auto cue feature on and off for you. Here we have some looping features. So for example, if I'm playing a track and I want to create a custom loop, I can actually start the loop here and then end it there, and it'll have a loop set automatically, and it'll play over and over in this section here. And you'll notice that the loop is engaged when these lights are blinking. Okay. And if I want to exit out of the loop, I'll just hit reloop exit, and then I'll just continue playing from there on out. There's two other loop modes you can toggle here. There's a loop mode which just it shows you a little menu here of predefined loops. So for example, if I want a half beat loop, a 1 beat loop, or a 4 beat loop, I can toggle that by just pressing down on this touch strip here corresponding to that particular loop type. And so it'll just loop automatically for me. And if I want to exit, I'll just hit reloop exit again. So I can do cool effects with this. For example, I can do little loops like that. And slip is a different loop. It's a loop, but it's a bit of a special loop. What this does is that you can loop a section of the track, but the track is actually still playing as if you did nothing in the background. So for example, I can loop to do like a 1/4 loop. And when I release it, the track just goes back to where it would have been if I had not done the loop at all. So this is kind of a cool thing to do some cool effects with. And I'm a really big fan of slip. So that's another looping feature. Loops here, cue the call features. If you want to memorize multiple loops, you can use these features here, these buttons here to call the loops and memorize them. Jog adjust all this does is it manipulates how much tension there is in the jog wheel. So if you really like a light spinning jog wheel, you'll just set it to light. If you want a really heavy jog wheel, then you'll just turn it to heavy. Pretty self-explanatory, anything in the middle as well. Hot cues. Hot cues are nice because they're basically like other cue points in your track that you can set, and then you can go back to them anytime you want. So for example, I might want to have a hot cue set halfway through the track, for example, where this breakdown starts, and then I might want to have another one when another part of the track starts, and then I can toggle in between those different locations by just setting the hot cue. So then it'll show you where the hot cue is on that particular part of the track on the screen, you know, so I can memorize another one right here, and then what happens is that I can then go back to that part of the track where that hot cue is. See? So just some really cool effects right there with just the hot cues in the loop. Now let me talk about the next part of the CDJ here. This is actually going to be the last part of the CDJ that I'm going to cover. It's this right portion here on the side. The first control that I'm going to talk about is the pitch fader, which you actually saw me use earlier when I was beat matching on the CDJ. Here on the Pioneer CDJ-2000 Nexus is actually called tempo, but it's the same thing as the pitch fader on the Technics SL1200s that I showed you guys in the last video on the vinyl. So basically all this does is just adjust the tempo of your track, and you can actually see as I'm moving the slider here, you can actually see the BPM counter show you the appropriate BPM change, both in terms of percentage adjustment and an actual BPM number. But like I said last time when I was doing the beat matching, be wary of the BPM counter here on the screen, because this may or may not be accurate to what the actual track tempo is. But yeah, I mean, this is pretty self-explanatory right here. This is just a pitch fader, tempo fader, adjust to the speed of your track. Okay, right next to it, there's a button called tempo reset. Tempo reset basically does kind of what you think it does. It actually resets the tempo to 0 adjustment. So regardless of where this pitch fader, this tempo fader is going to be at, when you hit this button, this green light is on, that's basically just going to reset the tempo of the track to whatever its natural tempo is. So this track, for example, is at 128 beats per minute by default in its natural state, no adjustment. And you know, I have the fader all the way down to the negative side here, so I have it slowed down. But the minute that I hit tempo reset, this reset back to 128. Otherwise, if I turn this back off, it's actually now down at like 120 or something. So that's all that does. And this can be useful sometimes if you just really do want to have just the plain vanilla BPM of the track perfectly set without this messing anything up for you. Okay. Right above the pitch fader is the master tempo button. Master tempo is just another name for key lock. So if you've dabbled in any other sort of audio software that manipulates beats and tempos and pitches, you might have seen a feature called key lock. And what that does is it actually changes, or it doesn't change, I'm sorry, it locks in the key of the track or the pitch of the track at its normal key or its pitch. So basically what that means is that when I move the pitch fader around, normally what happens without this on is that as I, for example, increase the pitch or this tempo of the track, the pitch of the track will actually go up as well. Or vice versa, if I go down, the pitch will go down as the tempo goes down. Well, if I want to prevent that from happening, I can hit master tempo, and then when I move the pitch fader around, the tempo will change, but the overall pitch of the track shouldn't change, or not very much. So this can be very useful actually, for example, if I'm beat matching and I might, you know, I'm not going to adjust it too much, let's say maybe up to 3%, and I don't want the pitch of the track to change, and at the same time, you know, as I'm beat matching, I may want to avoid anybody hearing that I'm, for example, nudging the tempo around just by using the jog wheel. I don't want people to hear that pitch bending as I'm adjusting the track live. So master tempo comes in really handy in those situations, because as I'm moving the jog wheel, for example, during, let's say, a melodic part, you won't hear that pitch up or pitch down as I'm moving the jog wheel or as the tempo is getting adjusted, because master tempo or key lock is set. So it's very useful. Again, like I said, if you want to just keep the pitch as it is in the track, you don't want it to adjust, or you want to sort of hide any adjustments to the beats, and you don't want that pitch bending to occur, so it's a bit smoother and cleaner as you're mixing. So very useful in those situations, but this does have its limits. So if you go into very extreme adjustments, so let's say minus 8% or even more than that, or maybe even less than that sometimes, you can actually start degrading the sound a little bit by having master tempo on. You can actually tell if you listen closely that the key lock is set, and that's because just the algorithm in the electronics here in the CDJ can only do so much pitch locking before it starts breaking down. So just keep that in mind, that don't go too crazy with the master tempo. Sometimes it's useful if you want to, again, smooth things out with the pitch bends, or if you want to keep the pitch set, but it does have its limits. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about here is the tempo button right above that, above the master tempo. And what the tempo button does is, I don't know if you can actually see this in the camera, but there is a plus or minus 6, 10, 16, and wide label right beneath it. And what that basically does is this sets how wide this pitch fader goes. So for example, right now I'm set at plus or minus 10, which you can actually see here on the display. It shows you what setting this is at. And what that means is that I can go up to plus 10 or down to minus 10% tempo adjustment on this pitch fader. Now if I want to make bigger changes, then I can set it to plus or minus 16, which will then expand the range to plus or minus 16%, or I can set it to wide, which actually lets me go up to 100%, so plus or minus 100%, which can create really big pitch or tempo changes. Or I can make it more fine and granular by setting it to plus or minus 6%, and then the pitch will adjust, for example, as I move the setting here, by 0.02% at a time. So this gives me finer control on the tempo. So this is very useful because sometimes you'll have tracks that are very different in tempos and BPMs, and you want to be able to still beat match them or do some cool things with them. And this will allow you to match beats that are completely far apart from each other. And I've actually seen people do some interesting things sound effects wise with the tempo range setting here and the pitch fader. Okay. Beyond that, there's this beat sync section right here. I'm actually not going to talk about that. Don't worry about it. As you're starting out, beat sync is not something that you need to worry about. Focus on your beat matching. Focus on your beat matching skills. Now, let me go ahead and now talk about the next part here, jog mode. Jog mode is something that I think you guys saw earlier. I may have pressed this at one point or another. Basically what this does is this changes the behavior of the jog wheel. So normally when you have this set to CDJ mode, as it is right now, all this does is it plays the track for you, and it just does your regular nudging like I did earlier in the beat matching part, where if I turn it, it speeds up. If I turn it the other way, it slows down. Now, let me show you what happens when I touch vinyl mode. When it's in vinyl mode, and actually let me rewind it. If I press the top of the jog wheel platter, you'll notice I just stopped the track. And it's kind of like as if I had just stopped a vinyl record on a turntable. So basically what vinyl mode does is that it treats the top of the jog wheel as if it was a vinyl record, as if you had a platter here and a record on top. So I can do basically all the things that I would normally do with the vinyl record. For example, as in stopping it, finding a beat like that by just moving my hand over the jog wheel. I can basically scratch. I can do spin backs like that. all kinds of cool stuff. And so this is really useful, so for example, if you want to do cool effects like that, or if you want to, I don't know, just do anything that would resemble a vinyl record on the CDJ. The other thing you'll notice too when you play around with this setting here is that, for example, if I set it back to CDJ mode and I play the track, when I pause it, it does that stuttering noise. Now if I switch it back to vinyl mode and I hit play pause, then it just stops like you would expect it to. And I don't know exactly why the CDJ mode does that. That's just kind of how it's designed. So if I switch it back to CDJ mode, you hear that stutter again, and vinyl mode just treats it as if it was just normal pause. And if you want to start up again, just hit the play pause button again. So what I would say is that this is very useful to have vinyl mode turned on. For example, if you do want to set the cue point to a different location within the track, because that way you can easily manipulate the location on the track where you want to set your cue point without having that stuttering noise going on. Okay. The other thing I want to point out with vinyl and CDJ jog mode is that be careful when you're beat matching and you're transitioning from one track to another live and you have vinyl mode on, because the top of the platter is now touch sensitive when I have vinyl mode. So basically, if I'm turning this jog wheel around like this, and if I accidentally touch the top of the jog wheel, I might stop the track momentarily. And what that's going to do is it's going to throw off your beat matching, and your beats are going to be off live. So basically, I would recommend, if you really want to avoid doing that, to set it to CDJ mode, and then that'll avoid that issue because the top of the jog wheel won't be touch sensitive anymore. Otherwise, if you feel confident about using vinyl mode the whole time, then feel free to do that. But just keep that in mind, because I've seen people mess things up a little bit live while they're transitioning between tracks by just having vinyl on and touching the top of the jog wheel by accident. Okay, so now let me go ahead and stop the track again, and let me just talk about the last two controls here. Let me just also point out that this top button here is disk eject, which is exactly what you would think. It ejects the disk if you have a CD in, so that's pretty much that. So going back to this is called vinyl speed adjust, and these two knobs, what they do is they basically let you control let the CDJ work as if it was a turntable. So for example, the top knob, what this does is it sets the breaking speed. So right now it's set all the way to the left, so everything is instantaneous on the CDJ. You know, just like you would expect it to. But if I turn it all the way to the right, and now when I stop the track using the play pause button, you'll notice it's a little different. So basically what this does for you is it mimics what would happen if you were using a vinyl turntable. If you were to turn the power off completely, you would then have the platter just slowly spin down all the way until it stops. So it mimics that effect. And this is really nice to use if you want to have that effect play for something while you're spinning. And what's nice about this is that you can actually set how much of that effect is in play. So for example, if I set it to the middle here, you'll notice that there's a little bit of that slower pause, but it's not as big as if I had it all the way to the right here. So if I turn it maybe 3/4, now it's a little bit more pronounced. So what's nice is you can set how much of this effect you have going on. And then the last one here, this last knob here on the side, or just below that one, is the this release start. And what this does is this actually kind of makes the CDJ mimic a belt-driven turntable. So belt-driven turntables, what they're kind of notorious for is that they don't have the high torque that a direct drive turntable would have, like the 1200. So what happens is when you hit play, the platter doesn't start up immediately. It actually has a little bit of a delay to wind up to speed. So what you can do is you can mimic that effect by having this knob turned all the way to the right. And now when I play the track from its paused location, it'll slowly spin up to speed. And then again, same as the vinyl breaking, you can actually adjust how much of this effect you have going on. So, just like that. So these are really cool effects to have for variety of different situations where you want to make things a little interesting. And I've seen people use these features with the jog wheel, with the pitch fader, and loops and other things like that. So experiment with them and see what happens, and you might hit upon a really cool effect. So with that, I basically will say that we're pretty much done here, just talking about the CDJs. I think that the video's gone a little bit longer than I originally had planned, but I just wanted to cover all the basics here of all the different controls and kind of touch upon everything, just so you guys are comfortable with using these devices. They can be a little bit intimidating given all the different things that they have going on them. So, but if there's anything that I didn't cover in detail, or is there something that I didn't quite explain very well and you're a little bit confused still, feel free to ask the trainers. Like I always say, ask them any questions. They can always show you right in front of you how things work or how things can be used, and we'll hopefully be able to answer your questions better if you have any of them. But otherwise, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope you guys take this this knowledge and use it to start practicing and becoming great DJs, practicing your beat matching, practicing all the different features of the CDJs, and all I can say at this point is just practice, 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 and you'll get to that point where you want to be. And I hope to see you guys get really good at this, and I hope to see you guys play at the big events that DVC puts on, like Let's Bounce, and just have fun and have other people have fun while you're playing. Okay? So with that, I'm going to bid you guys adieu. And like I said, I'll see you guys at the big shows. So this is Arthur out.